We've done North America, we've done Mesoamerica, which means that it's time to move on to South America. The highlight of this lecture will be the Inca civilization, but just so that you know, they are not the first. Civilizations existed in South America for thousands of years prior to them. Here's an artifact from one of those cultures. This is from the Mochi, I believe, and what exactly it is. I mean, obviously it's a head, but then there's that silly thing going on top of it. I'll probably ask you guys tomorrow, what is that? But like the Olmec, those civilizations are they're super old, and they don't last long enough or into a time period that we're interested in enough that we're going to spend any time on them. So off they go, and let's start looking and talking about the Inca. Okay, so they start as a small community high in the Andes Mountains in present-day Peru. So you're thinking the west coast of South America, in places that look just like this. Just like the Romans, just like the Mongols, they start off as a small community, but they grow and conquer. We remember them because they're the sort of winners. They eventually conquered the entire west coast of South America. They've got a very organized government. They've got this sort of very efficient military system. You see here a real nice image of them up in the mountains. You see their their ruler back there being carried by all the people. You've got your llamas. Llamas are very important. And in the front, I'd like you to notice the prisoners in this picture. There are clearly prisoners of war that are up there in the front, and then you've got the army, and of course you've got the ruler in the back being carried by those four people. Now, there's another thing that I'd like you to notice in this picture, and that is that the king is being carried. There's not a carriage. There's not a wagon anywhere in this picture, and that's because the Inca did not use wheeled vehicles. They didn't use wagons. They didn't use chariots. They didn't have the wheel. It's a very sort of interesting, very very sort of puzzling thing that they have this very advanced civilization, this highly advanced military. They got all this stuff, but they didn't have the wheel. They didn't have the wheel until the sort of the Europeans come in. So it's a sort of an interesting thing that this again very sort of basic thing that was invented many thousands of years ago. It was invented in Sumeria. It's invented far from these guys. These guys would never have heard or talked to anybody that was from that area. So the idea didn't spread there, and they're able to do all this other stuff. But this sort of simple idea of the wheel doesn't occur to them, and I think that just is an interesting lesson on exactly what's obvious and what isn't. The Inca had an interesting way of paying taxes. Their taxes were labor. So their taxes were, instead of paying a certain amount of money, you owed a certain amount of your time to build, the wall for the emperor, or to build, this one particular thing. That was how the people down the ladder paid to people up the ladder. And the Inca are living in the mountains, so their farms look like this. You see there, a house that someone would have been in. You see a nice little llama. This terraced farms is the way that they farmed over there. In addition to not having the wheel, they didn't have a written language, but they were able to communicate, right? They have this bureaucracy. They've got, again, this sort of highly centralized, highly organized government. So they've got to be able to keep records, who paid their taxes in the form of labor and who didn't. And the way they did that were with these interesting series of knotted strings. You could read these strings, sort of how you'd read Braille, where the string was and how big the string is has to do with what it's telling you. This very sort of interesting, very different way of keeping records, and that's how they did it. This is Machu Picchu. It's the most famous Incan city. It's way up in the mountains, and many of the Incan cities were wrecked. A lot of nice big Incan cities have been not as well preserved as this one because, they were conquered by the Europeans who came over, and then just, centuries of people building stuff. So there are some archaeological, places where you can see good Incan stuff, but this one was just wonderfully preserved because it was forgotten. The Spanish, never found it. The Incans had previously abandoned it, so it was just this sort of empty city sitting way up there that no one knew about until it was discovered by this explorer in the 1800s. So it's remarkably well preserved, and it's really, other than the roofs all being gone, it really looks a lot like what it probably looked like then, which is super cool. And so it's really famous, and it's a big tourist attraction. A lot of people go there. If you ever find yourself in Peru, you definitely want to go check out Machu Picchu. And then the sad ending to the story is, of course, that the Spanish come in and they bring smallpox and diseases with them, and that really hurts the Inca just like it did the Native Americans everywhere. And then the people that remain are defeated by the Spanish who come in. This is a painting of Pizarro is the European there taking out the emperor, taking him prisoner. So the Inca fall to the Spanish. They have this big old empire that would have lasted who knows how long if it weren't for the the alien invaders coming in from the Eastern Hemisphere. But they do, and so the Inca go away as a civilization. The last question I'll leave you with is just why did it happen this way? Why did the Europeans conquer the Americas and not the other way around? The Inca, the Aztec, these were highly advanced empires, and yet they fall quickly to relatively small amounts of Europeans. Why does that happen? And there's this famous book, you might read it next year, that posits an answer to this in 3 words, and that is guns, because the Europeans have those and the Native Americans don't. Germs, that is the tremendous importance of the diseases that rip through the Native Americans after the Europeans arrive. And steel, it sort of goes without saying what that is. Again, those are the advantages that the people from Europe had over the Native Americans that they were encountering. So sort of remember that, right? Keep those things in mind, and I'm done.